Before China's first emperor forged an empire through iron and blood, the land had already endured 5 centuries of war. It was an age of beautiful madness. Honor was a relic. Betrayal was a currency. And the price of defeat could be total annihilation. This was the Warring States period, where power rewrote the rules. And it all began when the Zhou kings lost control of everything beneath heaven. In 771 BCE, the old Zhou capital at Haojing fell. The following year, the Zhou court moved east to Luoyi, near present-day Luoyang. The dynasty survived, but survival came at a great price. The western homeland was lost. The royal wealth and armies gone. The states once created to defend the crown had grown into giants. They commanded armies of their own and ambitions to match. In rank, the king remained above the lords. In reality, he was at their mercy. The crown still carried authority. It no longer carried power. And when power leaves the throne, the wolves come. Without a strong king, the Zhou world still needed order. Every state waited for weakness. The strongest lords stepped into the void. History would remember them as the Hegemons. The first to rise was Duke Huan of Qi. Aided by his brilliant statesman, Guanzhong, Qi transformed its coastal wealth into military power. But Duke Huan did not crown himself. Instead, he claimed to defend the weakened Zhou king under a brilliant policy: honor the king and resist the barbarians. It was political genius. The weaker the royal court became, the more valuable it was to rule in its name. From the modern world, this may look like hypocrisy, a sacred mask for ambition. But in that trembling age, the mask still mattered. It was one of the last restraints holding the world back from the abyss. For a moment, a lie was better than no law at all. But peace built around one man is only an illusion. When Duke Huan died, his court descended into blood. His sons fought over the succession, and Qi's supremacy collapsed in a single night. The fragile mask of order was ripped away. And from the south came Zhou, vast, proud, and hungry. Dismissed by the central states as barbarian, Zhou had grown too powerful to accept the old rules. They rejected the ancient hierarchy. They crowned themselves kings. It was a declaration that the old world was dying. With Qi broken, Zhou surged north. The southern kingdom swallowed territory like a predator feeding. Only one northern power was strong enough to stand in its path: Jin. For generations, Jin and Zhou tore at each other. Neither could finish the other. At the Battle of Chengpu, Jin shattered Zhou's advance, but it did not shatter Zhou's ambition. Decades later, King Zhuang of Zhou marched his armies right to the gates of the Zhou royal domain. But he did not strike. Instead, he asked a question that froze the entire world. How heavy are the sacred 9 tripods? The tripods were the ultimate symbols of the divine right to rule. To ask their weight was to ask, could they be moved? Could they be taken? Could the Zhou king be replaced? Today, it may sound like a clever anecdote, but in 606 BCE, it challenged the highest authority beneath heaven. King Zhuang did not cross that final line. Not yet, but his question released an idea that could never be buried again. The wars between states were only part of the chaos. The kingdoms were also collapsing from within. For centuries, power had flowed through bloodlines. Kings ruled over lords. Lords ruled through hereditary clans. But now, the same rot that had crippled the king began to devour the lords. Within their own states, powerful clans quietly gathered land, controlled armies, and placed their own men in key offices. The rulers still sat on their thrones, but power was slipping into the hands of the families beneath them. The lords had once risen beneath the king. Now, their own ministers were rising in the shadows beneath them. Nowhere was this more dramatic than in Jin. Once the great shield of the north, Jin had dominated the central plains and held Chu at bay. But behind its strength, the ruling house was being hollowed out. Rival clans turned the court into a battlefield. Alliances shifted, families rose and fell, and after generations of struggle, only 3 emerged from the wreckage: Han, Zhou, Wei. They carved the giant of Jin into 3 pieces. When the sword tore through the great kingdom, the message was clear. The old world was no longer just bending. It had snapped. By the dawn of the warring states, the map had been carved apart and rebuilt. Hundreds of smaller states were gone conquered, absorbed, or erased. From their ruins rose 7 giants: Qin, Chu, Qi, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, the 7 warring states. But these were no longer the old domains of hereditary lords. They were becoming centralized, territorial states, built to control land, people, and war. Rulers broke the power of the old nobility. They counted the people, taxed the land, and raised mass armies. Roads, walls, and canals carried their power into every corner of the realm. China was still divided, but the machinery of unification was already being built. War had always shaped the world beneath heaven, but in the warring states, war was remade. Chariots gave way to mass infantry. Cavalry swept across open ground. Farmers became soldiers. Royal foundries poured out weapons by the thousands. Wars no longer ended after a single clash. They dragged on for years. Victory became a calculation of grain, weapons, and human lives. A ruler had to know how many men he could raise, and how many he could afford to lose. The states were no longer fighting to lead the old world. They were fighting to swallow it whole. Every state understood the new law: reform or die. Bloodlines were no longer enough. Rulers needed administrators, generals, and diplomats who could deliver results. Talent crossed borders. Ideas followed. In this age of iron and blood, thought itself became a weapon. As armies fought for territory, thinkers fought for the future. Confucians turned to virtue and ritual. Mohists condemned conquest and defended the weak. Taoists warned that ambition would consume the ambitious. Others demanded law, punishment, and control. Strategists studied deception, terrain, and command. This was the 100 schools of thought. An intellectual explosion born not from peace, but from crisis. Every ruler searched for ideas that could make his state stronger, but only one kingdom forged them into a system: Qin. For centuries, Qin stood on the western edge of the world, but the frontier gave Qin room to expand and fewer old traditions to restrain it. Then came Shang. He did not merely reform Qin, he rebuilt it for war. Old privileges were broken. Land and households came under tighter control. Rank could be earned through service and through blood. Farmers fed the armies, soldiers expanded the state. Officials counted every field, every measure of grain, and every man available for war. Other kingdoms had reformed. Qin turned reform into a system. By the later Warring States period, Qin was no longer an underdog. It had become a machine built for conquest. The Eastern Kingdom saw the danger. But the machine was already moving. 5 centuries of war had destroyed the old world and built the machinery of the next. China remained divided, but division could no longer last. One state had mastered the age. Qin. Its ruler would not lead the old world. He would end it. The first emperor. He united China, but could his empire survive him?